I will now hand over to Christina, who is from GIFS, who will tell us a little bit more about how this session is going to unfold this morning. Like I said, it's Be the Difference. We're doing things differently this morning. Thank you, Christina.
Very much, Tupiso. And thank you very much to all of our attendees, as well as our panelists who have joined us today. As Tupiso says, be the difference. And that is why we are speaking on the impact of corruption on the economy. So a very warm welcome to everybody who is here today. We would like to introduce Dr. Kirshen Pillay, who is the CEO of the Graduate Institute of Financial Sciences. Dr. Kirshen Pillay will be your moderator for this session and is regarded as one of the foremost thought leaders and an education trailblazer and visionary. He is deeply committed to mobilizing the power of education to create a better Africa for others to inherit. Kirshen is an astute innovator who is nationally acknowledged and respected for his constituent efforts to level the socio-economic playing fields by making quality education available to all. As a result, Kirshen was named the TYI Top 100 Young African Innovators of 2018. This accolade is one of many commendations from business and industry bodies that recognize Kirshen's contributions to business. His foresight and vision, his achievements, as well as his future.
What was useful is to get.
These include being named a National Business Award finalist in 2017 and a finalist in the Entrepreneur of the Year and Young Achiever category in the Covenant National Oliver Top Awards in 2017, 2018, and 2019. With that being said, ladies and gentlemen, it gives me such great pleasure of inviting Dr. Kirshen Pillay to take the floor. Thank you very much, Kirshen.
Thank you, Christina, and welcome, delegates. What a topic, and how relevant is it for South Africa today? Due to the importance of this topic, we have not wasted any time, and we've brought you some of South Africa's heavy hitters to shed some insight on corruption and its impact on the economy from a non-life view. Firstly, ladies and gentlemen, I'd like to introduce our panelists to you. America may have Michelle Obama, but South Africa has Mpumi Zwane. Please help me welcome your first panelist of the day. Mpumi Zwane is the Financial Director of Unilever Southern Africa. She has over 2 decades of experience in strategy, leadership, and portfolio management within the financial services and FMCG industries. With all her accolades, her proudest one is being the mom of 2 amazing kids, Amani and Nsika. Not only has she blazed trails in the financial services sector and at home, she has held many coveted titles, such as the Vice President of the Durban Chamber of Commerce, the former chairperson of the Women in Business Association of South Africa. Mpumi today currently serves as a non-executive director with many organizations and on many boards in South Africa. Mpumi, welcome to today. We are so excited to have you join us.
Thank you so much, Kirshen, and good morning to everyone, the panelists and the attendees today. And I hope I can be of value to your life. Thank you for that introduction, Kirshen. I appreciate it.
Pleasure. Thank you, Mpumi. Next, you have seen sharks in the ocean. Some of you may have watched them on TV as serial entrepreneurs. Joining us today in our fight against corruption is edupreneur and CEO of Aqua Empowerment Solutions, Praline Ross. Praline is a PhD candidate and whose purpose in life is to ensure that she impacts and assists organizations and individuals to unlock and utilize their own abilities. Ladies and gentlemen, please help me welcome Praline. Praline, thank you for joining us today.
Thank you, Kirshen. Hi, everybody. I hope that I can be of value. Thank you for having me. Thank you.
Pleasure. Ladies and gentlemen, as I said to you, we are bringing in the big guns. So the next panelist is a well-known face in South African politics. You have seen him on television. You may have listened to him on radio and even read about him in the newspaper. Ladies and gentlemen, please help me welcome political analyst, full professor of political sciences, and deputy dean of research in the economic and management sciences faculty at the University of Western Cape, Professor Ngomi Zulu. Welcome, Professor. Sorry, Prof, you're on mute, so we can't hear your wise words at the moment.
Oh, thank you very much for having me. Thanks to your panelists, and also thanks to all the colleagues who have attended this session. I look forward to it. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Prof. Last, but certainly not least, ladies and gentlemen, the voice on radio that we've all grown up with, championing consumer rights, the Isabel Jones of our time, consumer journalist Wendy Knowler. You can catch her on East Coast Radio, East Coast Radio's Consumer Watch, as well as on Radio 702 and Cape Talk with Bruce Whitfield on Money Talk, where they discuss all financial services related issues. Now, if you thought that was impressive, this overachiever has served on the final year, was acting chair, and currently serves on the board of the Banking Ombudsman. Watch out, fraudsters. This consumer ninja has her eye on you.
Thank you, Kirshen. You sure know how to do an introduction.
Ladies and gentlemen, please, please help me welcome Wendy Knowler.
Thank you. Yeah, jumping the gun there, but thank you very much. I look forward to a really interesting session. I have a very different background. We all have very different backgrounds, and I hope we add our little bit to create a very interesting conversation for the participants. And thank you all for making time for this.
Super. Thank you, Wendy. Now on to a more serious matter. The word corruption is coined from the Latin word corruptus, which connotes corrupted. Legally, it is referred to as abuse. Legally, it is referred to as abuse of a trusted position with the purpose of illegally obtaining material benefit for personal or other uses. Ladies and gentlemen, I come to you as a South African, and I say to you, we have been abused. Are we not strong? Are we not able? Are we not powerful as individuals and as a collective to overcome this abuse? Corruption is abuse. Corruption is abuse. Every day we allow this to happen. We knowingly allow ourselves and future generations to be abused. How does that make you feel? Please engage with us on our chat box. I would like to know from you, how does that make you feel? So, as we wait for your comments to come in on our chat box, exploited, cheated, says Simon Smith. So as we wait for more feedback and more traction on our chat box, disgusted, angry, Irfan says exploited, really sad, violated, betrayed. These are very strong emotions. And I know Praline will definitely be able to give us more feedback on that. Hopelessness. So, judging from what I'm seeing here, listening to the media, watching social media, watching news, looking at what's happening from the current affairs perspective, I think we can agree that corruption is virtually endemic in South African politics. And it impacts on all levels of South Africa's society and on business. But the question that I want to put to our panelists today, whose responsibility is it to say enough is enough? Where does the buck stop, so to speak? Is this a governance issue? Is this a social issue? And how do we put an end to it? So, Prof, I would like to have your feedback from a political perspective. So to repeat, corruption is endemic. It affects South Africa on all levels. Who is responsible for saying enough is enough? Where does the buck stop? And is it a governance or social issue? Once Prof is done, I'd love to hear from you, Mpumi. And if you can give us some insight from a role, speak to it from a role in business, and Praline on how to change mindset. And then Wendy, if you can give us some insight on it, on a two-pronged approach. To what extent has this invasive lack of morality filtered down to the consumer level? So let's open up with Prof. So Professor Ngomizulu, over to you.
Thank you very much, Kisan. I had made a promise that today I'm not going to make people angry, but I will state it as it is. That is one thing I'm notorious for. I call a spade and not a garden tool. Maybe as a point of departure, let's all agree that it takes two to tango. And if we move from that premise, then it means that we cannot expect one individual or one constituency to be our messiah. I was attending an event organized by the Eastern Cape Legislature where they brought together Commonwealth countries. And the question that was asked there was, what role should government play in addressing the ills that the country is currently facing? And my take was totally different from the rest of my co-panelists, because I said we cannot look up to government to solve all our problems. And one of the statements I made there was that some of these people who are now members of parliament, who insist that they want to be called honorable members, even if they do nothing honorable, I said some of them were our classmates, some of them were our students, some of them are not naturally gifted. Why then would we all of a sudden expect that all our problems can be solved by parliamentarians? That then answers the question you are asking as to whose responsibility is it to take us out of this quagmire. The reality of the matter is we are in trouble, we are in a crisis. And we didn't get there by mistake. There are people who are responsible for that, and not just one individual. So if we all agree that we didn't get to where we are right now because of the wrongdoing of one individual, we should also agree that we cannot get out of this by just investing on one individual and one individual only. So for me, the reason why corruption is so rampant in the country is because a number of us have normalized an abnormal situation. Corruption, as you correctly pointed out, in fact amounts to stealing from the general public, stealing from the electorate in order to amass wealth for ourselves and those close to us. So if we're doing that, we're basically doing a disservice to those who have entrusted us with the responsibility to lead. But we cannot then say politicians are the only ones who are corrupt. By the way, very few politicians have money. Most of the money comes from the private sector. The so-called brown envelopes come from the private sector. So therefore, it means that as much as it is okay for us to focus on the politicians as our political leadership, we should at the same time look into the private sector and ask the question, how are they contributing to this? So the bottom line, therefore, is that almost all of us are responsible for the current situation. When you do one thing wrong and do it consistently, it appears as if it's normal. So in other words, we have normalized an abnormal situation. And in order for us to get out of this, we have to revisit things that used to happen before we became corrupt, and then go back there and then do things differently. What I mean then in this case is that we have to look into our politicians as we normally do, but we also have to look at our judiciary. On many occasions, I've accused the judiciary of operating as if they are politicians themselves. Instead of applying the law, they get into politics, which is not their terrain. And in fact, one of the respected judges in this country ended up even entering the religious sphere. And I was angry with him at the time. You know who I'm talking about. And I even said to him, the likes of Caster Semenya, for them to win the 800 meters, they run on their lane. Don't cross the lane. If you are a lawyer, practice law. If you're an educationist, do exactly that. If you're a thief, I cannot encourage you to stay on the lane because it's wrong. Then you can't be the only one who is exonerated. You have to change the lane and then do things correctly. So basically, I'm saying politicians have a role to play. Our so-called independent judiciary also has a role to play, but you and I as the general public also have a role to play. Unfortunately, those few individuals who still want to do things right, they are eliminated. We have heard of the so-called political killings. Most of the time, people who are useless will never be killed because they are there and they are used by anyone. They don't have a backbone. You give them a brown envelope and then you ask them to run your errands and the show goes on. But the few who are anti-corruption are the ones who are normally killed because they basically become the stumbling blocks, and that becomes a problem. And then when it comes to our religious figures as well, some of them are claiming to be pushing the gospel, but at the back of the mind, they know exactly that they want to amass wealth. And that amounts to corruption, which has already been defined as theft, and in fact, undermining the integrity of those who have entrusted them with the responsibility to lead. So the religious factor, therefore, this sector cannot be left out of this equation because they play a critical role. And then in the rural setting, which is where I come from, you have the institution of traditional leadership. They play a critical role in making sure that as society, we behave in a manner that is anti-corruption. But the moment our leaders, our traditional leaders become corrupt, when they sell land which belongs to the community, then you have a problem. Because the moment you challenge that, you are then eliminated. So the bottom line, therefore, for me is that we cannot look at one institution or look at one individual and say that if we address that particular issue, we'll be out of corruption. The reality of the matter is we are in this all at once. And for us to get out of this, we have to work as a collective because the impact is dire. If you look at the corruption index, South Africa is climbing up the list very quickly, and the impact is negative, is a negative one. And then if you look at the number of people who want to have deals with South Africa, be it at a bilateral level or at a regional level or under multilateralism, the number is reducing simply because we are associated with corruption by virtue of the fact that we are climbing up the corruption index. So for as long as we do that, we're doing ourselves a disservice. And for as long as we expect one sector to get out of to get us out of this, we are making a mistake. So I'll leave it for now and hope that other questions will come later. But for me, it's a collective effort. We have to work as a collective. Thank you.
Thank you, Professor Ngomi Zulu, for that. So just to sum up what you're saying, you're saying that it's an entire ecosystem that is causing this. We cannot look at it at the tail end or at the middle or at the beginning. It is an entire ecosystem that results in this knock-on effect. It's your religious leaders, it's your business, it's your traditional leaders in your rural areas. So ultimately, the responsibility lies with us. But I think you've highlighted a very important point when you said that we are normalizing something abnormal. And that is very powerful because we are now allowing it to be acceptable. Yes, government is corrupt. Yes, this organization has brown envelopes. So let's take it to business, Mpumi. If you don't mind shedding some light on this, because I'm hearing profs talking about the brown envelope and says, listen, politicians don't have money, and it is you guys that are actually funding this.
Well, I heard Prof's point of view, and I'm afraid at some level, I do agree with him. In a corruption process, there's a corrupter and the corruptee. And often the corrupter is the one who derives the most benefit. And often that corrupter comes not from the public sector as such, it is the one who is in business. I'll make an example of a few issues we've had in our country. Usasa, we can go back to that issue to see how the part of the government was also a recipient of the corrupt behavior driven by the business. We go into a space of just a commercial part, Steinhoff, corruptor, corruptee, corruptor gains the most benefit. Corruptee gets some benefits, obviously, but often is short term. And if you look at a space in a country, this emerging country, with an economy that is quite separated, with the rich being so rich, the poor being so poor, everyone is aspirational. They want to have the quick buck. They want to get something quicker. They want to make the money quicker. We have entrepreneurs who are in business, who want to get a quick buck. And they're often at the good breeding ground of the corruptors' base. So for me, if I look at where the corruption really stems in, it is a cost to business because it's a cost that you can't really budget for, but often it lies in a space where somebody receives a bigger benefit. And it often sits in certain functions, procurement as one space in business, whether it's a private business or a public space or a government space, where there's procurement, where there's bigger projects that are very complex, that requires different parts of cost to be involved in the process. Those are good spaces where corruption is being driven, because in the end, it's all about what do I get in return for my buck. It's about value for my money. And if I can get more out of it at a less cost, I will do so. And corruption for business provides a platform of getting the revenue or the buck quicker at a very, very little cost. As you know, capitalism as a system, economic system, is all about making more for myself, making more for my business at a bottom line at profit level, which means the more I can make in profits, the better for myself. And the more cost I can cut, the more cost I can reduce somewhere, somehow. And often the cost that prevent corruption are legislative. They're often to do with compliance purposes, and they're quite costly. And to try and really go behind those costs and cut those costs, it means paying somebody to make it quicker for me to get my ISO certificates or compliance certificates, so I can then do business quicker. Sometimes the environment itself lends itself to driving and promoting corruption, where it is hard to do business in a country. Sadly, in South Africa, doing business is not seen as something that's quite easy right now. We're quite difficult countries to do business with. And because of that, we're also a breeding ground for corrupt behavior, where for me to then be compliant, I'll pay somebody to give me the paper, therefore I am now compliant, I can go make the money. So we've got to really look at the balance. It is a full value chain, but we've got to ask ourselves, what are we doing to promote this corruption from all the different levels? Yes, there is poverty element, there is the aspirational element, wanting more money quicker, there's the capitalistic mindset that comes in, wanting more back for my investment. But in the end, all of us suffer. Just looking at what the UN gave us as a number, in 2018, the cost of corruption was valued at 3.8 trillion US dollars in the world. For emerging country, that number sits at 1.2 trillion US dollars globally. So the cost of corruption, if you imagine that money just being channeled into the health services, into education, how many, and to poverty, because some countries are still hungry in today's era. If you take that money, you just really focus on eliminating poverty, improving education and health system of the world. That is more than enough money for many, many countries to really improve itself. But that goes into corruption. So my sense is really corruption, it's a moving piece that keeps evolving. It keeps changing its shape based on what the need is in business. But the corruptor and the corruptee play a big part in driving this behavior. And certainly business is often the corruptor in the process.
That is powerful. So people sitting here today in our panel, and our delegates of today are actually individuals from business. So from what we're seeing is we're saying that business is at the root of evil. I love what Tsepegi has put out. This is values-based issue. This is a values-based issue. It is rooted in below water iceberg, make up or design of each of us as an entity. Definitely a social issue. So Mpumi, thank you very, very much for this. And I'm going to ask the question to you before I move on to Wendy to hear from a consumer level. Where does the buck stop?
I love that question because that question is really you said it earlier, it's a values question. For me, I cannot say the buck stops with one party. The buck stops with all of us at a value level. If I'm really looking at things through survival mode, I would justify corruption because it's all based on how I view something. It's my value as a person. If I change my value to say, the cost of corruption is costing me so much, am I willing to sacrifice my child's future? Then ensure that they suffer when I'm gone because of my corrupt behavior. That may change my view. For me, it starts in our homes. It starts in our business environments as well, to then move on from that. But I would say the home is where it all starts.
Fantastic. I think, Mpumi, we also all are singing from the same hymn sheet. If you look at what Eddie is saying, Eddie says, nothing new. The issue is how do we reinstall it back into society? It's a social issue. It starts at home. It starts with our own personal values. Wendy, Mpumi, thank you for this. Wendy, let's go to you. Give us some insight from a consumer level and how you see this playing out.
Okay, quite different take from the others. From my perspective of talking to consumers who feel wronged in many varied ways. You mentioned it about 4 or 5 times to drive it home. You said we are being abused, Gershon, and many consumers are being abused through a lack of, well, certainly by fraudsters. Impersonation fraud shot up 330 something % in 2020 over 2019. You let that sink in. So fraudsters, through a lot of the new people embracing the digital way of doing things for the first time and being quite naive, that had a large part to play. So COVID lockdown played right into fraudsters' hands clearly, but companies certainly then and not even now, I don't think, we're talking about abuse, are not geared up enough to deal with all that deluge of people saying, I've never had an account with you, or I have an account and it was dormant and now I'm listed at the credit bureau for, 4,500 Rand. And I've dealt with big corporates who make people wait weeks, if not months. In one case, the company actually said you will have to wait 90 days. They were a company that was seemed to be the one company particularly targeted through the personal details getting out with the Experian breach. And they actually said you'll wait 90 days. Now that is abuse. That is somebody sitting with, an adverse listing at the credit bureau, unable to access any new credit of their own, jumping through all the hoops, doing the affidavits. And yes, we realize that has to happen. But you can imagine from the consumer's point of view, so that in not upscaling to deal with the increased number of fraudulently opened accounts, ID impersonation is abuse, corporate abuse in my book. As is, if one company is particularly being targeted by the fraudster, that tells me that their systems, in onboarding these people, their checks to see that this person really is who they say they are not strong enough. So that is opening consumers. That is a form of abuse as well, not having sufficient protocols in place to prevent the fraudsters succeeding. I think technology is going to solve impersonation fraud to a certain extent, or to a large extent. I attended a conference recently, so identifying ourselves, we will all have databases. We'll be on a database with our eyes, our fingerprints, our face. It'll be harder for the fraudsters to do it. On the other hand, consumers, it has to be said, are often through this endemic lack of ethics, morality, call it what you will, are, as Mpumi said, the corruptees, in that they, okay, let's start with insurance fraud. People have kind of selective morality where they don't think, some people obviously, where they don't think that saying that you are the regular driver of the car when it's actually your 19-year-old son, to get a lower premium, that's really not, that's not fraudulent or corrupt or unethical behavior, because we need a lower premium, and insurance companies rip us off. We all know this. Find any reason to repudiate a claim, so we'll just do that. We'll pad a claim. It's so accepted that you'll find people talking about it at a braai, and I'm thinking, you're actually telling people that you're a bit morally bankrupt here, and it seems to be okay because it's the insurance industry, so they're fair game. So yeah, and then the corruptee point example I was going to make was, I know of many people who've paid a bribe to a traffic cop when asked, just to get out of the situation, to avoid a big fine and get on their way with the least amount of time and trouble. So anyone who's done that is part of the problem, because that's, you can't rail against government level corruption or business corruption and then pay a bribe to a traffic cop, because it's the same thing. On a smaller scale perhaps, but it's the same lack of basic morality that leads to it. And the insurance industry has a word for it. It's moral risk. So someone who's branded a moral risk through whatever reason, found to be lying about something, has a real price to pay. Is the industry doing enough to explain that, to make a deal of it, to kind of, in a way of, as an attempt to really get the message across? I don't think so. So yes, we're going to come to how we stop it, and maybe I should save my comments for that time. But yeah, for me, it's a double-edged sword. Consumers who are at the end of this form of abuse we're talking about, through lack of ethics, lack of care on the part of some corporates to deal with cases of fraud. But on the other hand, through us as a nation generally being, gosh, it's a hard thing to say, being on the lower end of the scale when it comes to morals and ethics, I think we very easily, while railing against it on a large scale, we find it quite easy to accept moral slips of our own. Just a perfect example is, I deal with a lot of cases where people have finger trouble doing EFTs. So they leave off a number and the banking system will just add a zero and make it an account number that actually exists at that bank, and sees them unintentionally gifting a stranger anything from a few $100 to several $100,000. And they write to me because the person, and sometimes it's a company, usually a small one without a big reputation to uphold, just finds some reason why it's okay to keep the money. Of course, the courts there's many precedents on this. The courts say if you keep money in that way, that lands in your account that is not intended for you, that is theft. But they don't see it that way, and these arguments play out on social media that I track. And when I step in, I get hammered, because they say, you put food in my lap, I'm going to eat it. It was from the ancestors or God, or they knew I was battling and needed the money. And I've stepped in and got told, give back the land and then you can talk, kind of thing. So there's this. And if I do something nice, I say this one can keep the land. So I take it with a pinch of salt. That's how you play on Twitter. But the point is, the whole issue of South Africans and morality is a very slippery, murky place, applied selectively, often when it's self-serving, not seen as a moral lapse, and all sorts of very creative justifications created in order to justify it on a personal level.
So
while you
Wendy,
take out.
I'm sorry to interrupt. I'm just being focused on time. I'm trying to be a good moderator to stay
Sure,
on time.
absolutely.
Yeah. So, Wendy, thank you so much for this insight. It really, I really like what you're saying. But again, it goes back to what Professor said in the beginning. What he said at the beginning was that we are normalizing abnormal behavior.
Yes.
For example, padding off a claim.
Mm-hmm.
It's now within the insurance industry, we've become so accustomed to it that when claims are actually paid out, all of that is taken into consideration. It now then goes back to feeding to whether it's a social issue and where what sort of value systems we teach people. And I'm loving the comments coming through from Graham, because 68% of our audience here today said that business is the corruptor. But Graham Shaw has said business is not the corruptor, people are.
Mm,
Business is not the corruptor, people are.
yeah. At whatever level they are. That's the thing.
Yeah. Whether it's the consumer, whether it's the service provider, it's the people in the ecosystem that are taking it off course. And then he goes on to say something even better, in my opinion, is this is neither governance or social. It is a criminal activity and treat it as such. And does that go back to what Professor said? The reason why Caster Semenya does so well is she sticks in her lane, and that's how she wins the 800 meters. And judiciary is trying to play the politician. And with them playing the politician, they're running between all the lanes, that they're not focusing on the criminal activity element of it. Guys, I'm just asking that question. And with that being said, Preline, I'm going to hand over to you. You, the mindset guru, you understand it from a social perspective. Provide some insight to us.
Thanks for that, Karshan. Given the responses from people earlier on, when you posed a question, people were talking about how they are so hurt, they are angry, they feel hopeless, given the corruption in our country. It's obvious that society is tired of corruption as a whole, and more people are awakening to the reality that the time for change has come. We cannot continue to just sit back and do the same thing over and over again and not get involved and expect a different result. In terms of whose responsibility, it's our responsibility. Each and every one of us are leaders in our own right. We are leaders in our homes, we are leaders in communities, churches, the business, the workplace, etc. So it's important for us to know that we are also powerful, given platforms like this, where we can actually make a difference. Now, in order to change mindsets, before we even look at changing mindsets, we need to agree on a few things. Life happens. So first and foremost, we need to learn to slow down the pace. If we are serious about change, we've got to learn to slow down. We are constantly busy. Ask anybody, hi, how are you? I'm hectic. I've got this vision of a brain constantly on a treadmill, because that's what we are. We are always hectic. So if we are serious about change, we've got to be able to slow down our pace. We've also got to accept that change is a gradual process. As humans, we want a quick fix. We want stuff to happen now, but change is a journey. It's gradual and it's also intrinsic. It comes from within. So we've got to accept certain things first. And also, this is a big one. We've got to learn to disconnect in order to reconnect. We are constantly busy, like many of us right now, are on either our laptops, or we've got digital distractions happening daily. If we are serious about changing our mindsets, how on earth are we going to do so if we are constantly digitally distracted? Having a growth mindset is a very, very important one. There are two types of mindsets: either a fixed mindset, where people believe that intelligence is fixed, you're either born with it or you're not. Or there's also a growth mindset, where people with growth mindsets believe in lifelong learning. You believe in learning from mistakes and turning those wounds into wisdom. And it's important, if we want to make a difference, if we want to make a change, we need to focus on having a growth mindset. Now, in order to physically change mindsets, we need to engage in a few practices. Mindfulness is key, first and foremost, in my opinion, where we need to be able to access deeper levels of consciousness through posing certain questions that have purpose and meaning and connect us to something meaningful while we're on this earth. Being mindful of our behaviors is extremely important. So we need to be self-aware. We need to self-reflect more, and also being aware of our diet. And by diet, I don't just mean the food that we eat. I also mean the type of music that we listen to. Does that have a positive or negative effect on you? The social media posts you follow. We need to be able to start introspecting more. And also your friends. Do they encourage you to do better and be better? Metacognition is another important one. Thinking about our thinking process. A perfect example right now, while I'm talking to you, some are listening, and within a few seconds, your mind will start wandering. So it's important for us to be aware of what is going on in our heads so that we can come back to reality again. Monitoring our thought processes, our behaviors is extremely important. And being able to use our 1,440 minutes in a day wisely. Practicing meditation, being able to disconnect, close our eyes, and be open to the divine presence. That's all part of slowing down the pace. That's all part of being able to change our mindsets. And of course, breathing exercises, being able to slow down and just take time out to breathe. You can ask yourself this question now. How many of us actually take time to relax on a bed and just look up at the sky or the ceiling for 2 minutes? We don't, because we're constantly hectic. If we are serious about change, these are the things that we need to do. Also,
Super. Sorry, Praline, again, due to time, I'm just going to step in here and say, so Praline is basically saying that we're not being deliberate with our thoughts. We are constantly running this rat race and we're not stilling our minds enough to think. So that's what I'm getting. But when we look at it, and I'm looking at what Mercia has put up in terms of how the consumer is protected, and we have our consumer activist herself saying, yes, you know what, I actually agree with you. We are making compensations. And I see that Bernice has also put in something about as long as greediness exists. So again, it comes back to self. It comes back to the individuals and the people that are perpetuating corruption by their behaviors. And we have to go down right to a social level to fix that. And we have quite a few questions to go through, but obviously our time is running out and we're not getting to the crux of the matter. But what I want to do now is, and I'm starting to see a common link here, where Mercia is saying in her comment that years ago, claims used to be repudiated. Now, the inflated portion is deducted. Isn't that a regulatory function? Isn't that a compliance element? Isn't that something legislative? And Mpumi, in previous discussions, has always brought up elements of the fact that corruption breeds in chaos. And when we don't follow that process and that well-oiled view, that's where we have this issue. So I just want to close off this question, and I'm going to open it to any of our panelists here. What social issue? Yes. But more than that, it's a people issue and how we educate our people to behave, and it goes down to their value system. But we also need to have a more robust judiciary. Do you all agree with me?
Our communication, I agree with you fully. As a country, we're very good at creating legislation, policies, procedures that are beautiful on paper, but we lack a lot in execution. And if you look at where the gap sits, on everything that has happened has gone wrong. We are afraid to hold people accountable. We are afraid of being transparent in the process, because when the media is free, there's more transparency in processes because the media is not biased in any way. Then you can hold people accountable and say, this has happened. What are we doing about that? We'll have reporting that is more real. When now we got to a point where everything is now corrupt, it becomes difficult to even get to a point of ensuring that there's accountability and there's execution in line with the policies. So for me, it is, are we walking our talk? For now, we are not. Until we walk our talk, we will never get things right.
Thank you so much, Mpumi. Wendy.
Just to add what Mpumi said, you know, in many other nations, there's a very robust whistleblower system, right? And this country tries to do it. But in reality, how many cases do we know where whistleblowers have been have paid a terrible price? They've been fired, they've been ridiculed, they've been, so it's almost, you know, you become the bad person because you're trying to stand up for the right thing, trying to expose it. And often whistleblowers work in tandem with the media to get the story out, to expose the rot. And just increasingly, I've sort of seen in my career, people are afraid, they're petrified of the repercussions, even on, you know, sort of fairly mild cases of consumer wrong, where they feel they're going to, they or their family, somehow people are going to get them and make them pay for speaking out, for exposing. It's a really, really dangerous culture that has been developing for some time.
Can I also come in, Kishan?
Please, Prof.
You know, there is a point that Mpumi made, which is quite critical. Like coincidentally, last week I was talking to some of the media houses saying that South Africa is very generous when it comes to making laws and policies, but we are basically nowhere in terms of implementation. And part of the reason is that we like this thing called sloganeering, and then trying to say the right things when in fact we do nothing. And the reality of the matter is we have a good constitution in South Africa, but you can ask 5, 10 people how many of them know a specific clause on what they are saying. Chances are it's zero. I was saying the same thing a few weeks ago when we were talking about the so-called step aside or step down resolution of the ANC. And people were concerned about section 25.70, not even knowing what it says. And they didn't even bother to look at 25.56 and 25.57 until I had to remind them, by the way, this is what the Constitution says. Did you do that? Only then did people realize that in fact they know very little or nothing. So the reality of the matter is, as Mpumi says, we can have good laws, we can enact good legislation, but for as long as we don't understand the content thereof, and for as long as we don't implement what is there, we are doomed. So the monitoring and evaluation section of our government has a lot to answer in this regard, because it's their responsibility. They've been saddled with the responsibility to ensure that monitoring and evaluation takes place. Unless that happens, we'll be coming with laws that amount to nothing. Thank you.
Prof, thank you very much for that. And obviously for the purposes of time, we've got 9 minutes left.
Oh.
I want to just fast track to our next question. And I'm going to skip the one question, and I'm going to go back to actually being to action. I know that in an hour we can't change much, but I want us to go to the question where we talk about what can the financial services industry do to stop perpetuating the cycle of corruption. So, panel members, we have an audience here that is a captive audience. So let's ask this captive audience, what can we do? So what can the financial services industry do to stop perpetuating the cycle of corruption? And again, let's take it down straight from you, Prof. We'll start with you and we'll go down the line. So what can the financial services industry do?
Thank you very much. For me, the financial sector, just like every one of us, we have to go back to the Ubuntu philosophy. And Ubuntu philosophy dictates that you are because I am. So before I do something wrong to you, I must first ask the question, how would I feel if something similar were to be done to me? So for me, that's a point of departure. And then before I give out that brown envelope, before I receive that brown envelope, that is the question I'll be asking. And then, of course, ask the broader question, if I continue doing this and get a lot of people doing these corrupt activities, where will that take the country? And as a business person, will I be able to operate a business in a country that is non-existent? If we're to answer those questions, then we'll be on the right track. Thank you.
Thank you, Professor. I think you also highlighting the thinking of many in South Africa. They look at a microscopic view of life, the here and now, and not a telescopic. What am I leaving behind? What is being created? Mpumi?
So question, I love your question, because the financial services are the people who will really be able to help us curb corruption if they just did things right. Corruption is about money. It's all about money. And when you follow the flow of money, where the money comes, where the money flows into or from, you can start to pick up where things go wrong. When we know there's been some wrongdoing somewhere, if the banks were honest enough to say, while you're under investigation, when we say the accounts are being frozen, because there is a court order that says the accounts are frozen, we cannot unfreeze your accounts because you are friends with the Minister of Finance or you are friends with somebody. As banks, we need to start walking the talk of what we have signed up for. Because if you control the money, you'll control the behavior. So for me, I think the banks, if they can be robust in really helping enforcing the law, enforcing the actions that are aligned in cutting corruption, it'll be a good start to begin with. But before that happens, because they're driven by profits and revenue as well as banks themselves, it's an issue. How do we start wearing the bigger picture beyond our back pockets as the banks as well?
Thank you, Mpumi. Praline?
Thanks, Kashan. On my side, I think it's important as well to have the financial services sector create more platforms of this nature where people can come together and actually help educate the nation on the importance of purposeful leadership, making sure that our leaders are more mindful and educating people on the importance of looking at themselves, being able to introspect. And an important one, Kashan, is in many instances, fraud and corruption have happened because people have this mindset of caring for themselves. We need to be able to move from ecosystem awareness to ecosystem awareness, not only thinking about myself and my power and my status, but to move towards thinking about the collective, because we look to our leaders to think about us as a nation and not themselves. So if we can have platforms like this, we can guide the nation forward. Thank you.
Excellent. Thank you, Praline. Love that. Wendy?
Okay, since there were a lot of non-life insurers in the virtual room, let me say this: there've been some comments, and I've agreed with them, saying, alluding to the fact that it's consumers. No, consumers are just totally overprotected and abusing it, etc., etc. I think look inwards first if we're talking about morality and what we can do. A lot of consumers find it quite easy to. And I'm not saying it's justifiable, it absolutely isn't, but to pad a claim or whatever, because the industry as a whole has a bad reputation and there's this consumer perception that they will find any means possible to repudiate a claim. I've sat on the board, I've handled thousands, hundreds of thousands, probably in 23 years, of insurance-related short-term issues. I've read all the annual reports. There are many, many, many cases where the TCF thing just got completely lost. So there's mis-selling, things aren't properly disclosed when the client's onboarded via phone, and then they can't get the call recording to verify. There's underwriting at claim stage. There's all sorts of things it's using. It was drunk driving. Now a lot of claims are around, well, you were speeding. And the Ombuds office had a lot to say about that becoming a trend and it being unjustifiable in many cases. So I think look inwards first, all of us, whatever side of the table we're on, look inwards first. Make sure that you don't have any moral lapses, and then look to make right in the rest of it. So I think if generally there was more TCF going on, look, you're going to get those consumers who will always be a bit morally bankrupt, but I think it'll make it harder for consumers to kind of feel entitled to behave in an unethical manner because the industry, well, you know, it's like looking at the politicians and saying, well, their nose is all in the trough, so why should we do any, we act correctly. It's about example. A bit provocative that, but I just wanted to put it out there from my perspective as a consumer journalist.
Wendy, thank you for that. I do not know where an hour has gone to. I now need to close within 120 seconds.
Sorry.
So let's quickly try and do this as swiftly as possible. I understand what everyone is saying. The words are Ubuntu. The words are selective morality, ecosystem versus ecosystem, moving away from self and thinking of others. Whatever we name it and whatever we call it, it starts with us. So although we can't fight corruption in a 1-hour insight session, we can start with our value system. We can start by introspecting, and we can start by saying that I'm not going to pad my claim. When someone talks about it at a braai, it's not going to be acceptable. I'm not going to pay that fine, and that it starts with self. So something very important that Angel Gurria, the OECD Secretary General, said at the Transparency International Foundation. He said integrity, transparency, and the fight against corruption have to be a part of the culture. They have to be thought as fundamental values. So if we educate the people, we educate the nation, and we have to be less tolerant to this. Because when we start allowing someone to throw that first stone and they break the window, and we don't say anything about that, then the next stone goes and the next window is broken. We need to stop and say, you threw that stone, it's unacceptable. But before we get there, we need to teach ourselves and those around us and those that we influence and have influence over, that throwing the stone in the first place is unacceptable. Ladies and gentlemen, I thank you for this amazing insight session. To my panelists, you all have been fantastic. We could not have asked for a more captive audience. You guys are excellent. Christina, I'm going to hand back to you so that we can go back to our president, Tshepiso Tsotso. Thank you again. Amazing, amazing panel, amazing delegates. Over to you, Christina.
Thank you very much, Dr. Kirshen, and thank you so very much to all of our amazing panelists, and thank you so very much to such an engaging and incredible audience. You have all definitely made this session really worthwhile. If we could please hand over to Tshepiso Tsotso to close off the session. Thank you very much, Tshepiso. Over to you.
I keep pressing the video. So thank you so much. I wanted to, also just touch on the points that I took from today's session, but I think Kirshen at the end really rounded it off so well that it's, I don't have to repeat it. I think we all got the message, and I think the messages around thinking about solutions. How do we start, even though we only had an hour, but how do we start to think about how we can impact this area in a positive light? So thank you all for joining us this morning. Thank you, GIFS, for partnering with us on this session and bringing such an interesting topic to the fore. So with that, I'd like to just encourage everyone to go onto our website, look out for more more interesting topics that we are going to embark on in our webinars in the coming weeks. So thank you, everybody, and I hope you have a good day.
Thank you.
Thank you, Tshepiso, and I think we can consider the session concluded. Once again, panel and to our delegates, you guys have been amazing. Have a great rest of the week.
Thank you, Kirshen.
Thank you, you too, Kirshen.
Thank you. Cheers.
Bye.
Bye.
Yes, bye.